sitting here, it's a test to our stamina, our tenacity, and actually our resilience. And it's apt because we're going to be talking about resilience and climate and sustainability and what have you. So, as individuals, I hope we can take it before we talk about the nature itself. From my side, it's obviously very important that we understand what we are not going to discuss. Okay? We are not discussing whether there is a problem with the climate. That's been established. Apparently the consensus is, yes, there is a problem. There is damage out there because of climate changes. We are also not going to be discussing, for those of you who might be disappointed, as to how will we finance the renewable industry. Because that's also happening somewhere else, that's not going to happen here. What is going to happen here is very simple. We're going to get very emotional, very sentimental, and extremely inward looking, and we will examine the damage that we as humans have already done to the world. That's all we will examine and try and see whether we can learn from it, we can prevent it in the future, and we can somehow mitigate the impact of the damage already done. That's what we are going to examine. So obviously I've got a panel of people who knows more about these things than I clearly can, which is why I'm the moderator. Otherwise I would have been probably one of the speakers, but that's okay. It's an easy job therefore. So, Dr. Jan Gibril, if I may start with you, sir. You are the Minister of Economic Planning of the government of Sudan. Now for those of you who don't know this, Sudan happens to be one of the top 5 vulnerable countries when it comes to damage coming out of the climate challenges. They're already facing it, they're trying to deal with it, but it's a big issue. Which is why I'm starting with you, sir. You're the star of the show for all the wrong reasons. Okay? So can you please tell the audience a little bit about Sudan, the country, the challenges you face, and what you're doing about it. And I would like you to restrict your answer to around 3 to 4 minutes, because I'll come back to you later anyway. Don't make it a very long one, because we want to have a conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. My name is Jibril. I'm not an expert in environmental studies. I'm not very good about climate, but I am an eyewitness of climate change in my own village and here. I was born in an area where we used to have thick plantation coverage and a lot of wildlife. Today we have none of that as a result of desertification. We were forced to leave that area, either to the cities to look for petty jobs, or migrate with whatever left of our livestock southward, and that resulted in frictions within host communities. And part of what you hear about the war in Darfur is actually attributable to climate change. Those whose land has been affected by desertification drought were forced to move south to other areas, and that resulted in friction in the local communities and led to tribal wars and also the deprivation of many, which resulted in some sort of revolution. So that's one of our biggest headaches. While we are suffering drought and desertification in some part of our country, we are also suffering floods, flash floods in other parts of the country. The country is huge, it's close to 2 million square kilometers. So you have different types of weather. from from north to south. So we have floods. Actually, it's a frequent annual flood in Sudan, and we always complain of floods, look for relief for people. That results in displacement of many, and not only that, but also we lose a lot of cultivated land to floods. That's one of Sudan's big headaches. Then we have a human-made problem, which is what we call it artisan mining. Right now, close to 2 million Sudanese are involved in artisan mining. And for them to start gold, they use toxic materials like mercury, like cyanide, and that results in polluting the water and creating a lot of problems for the population. So we need to find a way. Unfortunately, we were not able to stop that. One, because these over 2 million people are supporting so many families.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Because I'm going to come back to it.
Okay.
What you've heard so far is the damage is real and it's affecting the common man. That's what we've heard, right? It's not a figurative thing that you can sit in front of a television set and watch other people suffer. It's around you. That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Masita, can I come to you and welcome to the panel? And the reason I'm coming to you, apart from the fact that you bring some gender diversity to this platform, which is much appreciated, but also you come from Indonesia. You are the special advisor to the Prime Minister in Indonesia. And Indonesia is another country which has some particularly special challenges with the environment and is suffering the impact of it. Am I right? Some of it has been man-made, because if it's wrong, it can't be woman-made, so it's man-made. No, I'm just joking. But more importantly, can you tell your audience a little bit about the impact of the climate damage in Indonesia and what the government is doing about it? Just a quick flavor. We'll come back to it as well.
Thank you very much. So, as you all know, Indonesia is an archipelago countries, right, consisting of at least 17,000 islands, right? So you can imagine the impact of climate change will directly hit some of our islands. It has affected the agriculture, flooding, and all the area in Indonesia. According to one of the estimates, it could cost us nearly $50 trillion until 2050 to actually do the transition, right, the adaptation. Currently, the adaptation was actually mostly financed by the government. So fiscal cover around 60% of the financing of the Indonesia climate action. But as we all know that, this morning we had a meeting with the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Climate Action. Indonesia is one of the co-chairs. We discussed about this, financing, how we actually can link between adaptation and also mitigation, and how this big impact can actually, we can use and leverage this into getting more private financing and more public-private partnership in terms of the adaptation finance.
Okay, thank you very much, Masita. So, again, another live example of a major economy with lots of people. What's the population of Indonesia right now, Masita?
Yeah.
What's the population?
270 million.
270 million people. That's like 4% of the world's population, right? Affected directly by the impact of climate, right? I'm going to come to Dr. Hamidi, if I may. You are the head of the Arab Monetary Fund, perhaps one of the richest monetary institutions in the world, and you certainly have the capacity, and I'm pretty sure the willingness to do something about what's happening in your part of the world. Please tell the audience a little bit about the impact of climate change and how you addressing the anxieties and the worries and the vulnerabilities in your region. 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum to to start with, and very good evening to all of you. Let me welcome everybody here in Egypt, and I hope you enjoy this beautiful piece of this beautiful country. Finance, no matter how much you have, is always limited, and I think we should go to implementation. Implementation is very critical with whatever you have. So if you wait for the finance to be there, then you will not be able to achieve anything. Now, I believe we should look at this issue of climate change at a holistic approach. And therefore, we should deal with the climate change issues in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved in 2030. Sustainability is extremely important, and we should look at sustainability in a very comprehensive way, a macro level, which would include social, economic, environment. So no country, no individual, no group should be left behind. And it is an umbrella if we want to achieve the positive impact on people and on planet. We should pay attention to everything we do should be sustainable. Let us pay attention to adaptation. I think it's very important, not only mitigation. This requires, no doubt, an adequate finance. Even though in the last 10 years there is a doubling of finance for vulnerable communities, however, that's not enough. We need more financing. We need to pay a lot of attention to low income and vulnerable countries. And Sudan is an example, and we have here His Excellency the Minister of what has happened to his beautiful country. And therefore, the needed finance for vulnerables could reach about 600 billion a year by 2030. Therefore, let us work from now in order to be able to reduce the requirements of finance. Otherwise, we are going to have more challenges going ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Hamid, you made a very profound comment of how much you have, it's never enough. So if we are going to combat the climate challenge, we are actually talking also about lifestyle choices, about changing the way we live. And I'm going to come to this. If you'll allow me to go to Dr. Muchanga, the African Union Commissioner for Economic Development. One of his jobs is to look after 1.5 million people. So it's not a very large job that he has, because Africa is home to 1.5 million people almost, and Africa is ravaged is the right word, with the impact of climate change, and at a very basic human level, people's food, access to food, people's food itself in terms of growing, people's ability to travel, people's ability to live under proper shelter, people's ability to have medical treatment when they need it, all of it on a direct basis is being affected. Am I right, Dr. Muchanga? Have I taken the leaf out of your speech already? Over to you, sir. Tell us what's happening in Africa.
Well, I think what is happening in Africa is vulnerability.
Can you treat it as your friend?
Okay, I hear you. Okay. So what is happening in Africa is vulnerability. You gave the population 1.4 billion people, which is 17% of the global population. And 2050 is going to be 25% of the global population. Now currently, that 17% of the global population only accounts for 3% of global GDP. So the result is low productivity and high poverty levels because of the limited output against the background of the growing population. So vulnerability is an everyday affair, and it's made worse by the fact that Africa accounts for only 3% of climate change, the negative impacts of climate change, but it suffers the most. When there are floods, as indicated by Sudan, Africa suffers. When there is drought, and right now it's very massive in the Horn of Africa, a lot of animals are dying, and even people are also being affected. Africa suffers. So we are very, very, very much vulnerable to climate, and it's making the lives of ordinary Africans very uncertain on a daily basis. So this is the challenge that we face.
Thank you, Dr. Uchan. So, just ladies and gentlemen, before I come to Roberto, and there's a reason why I kept Roberto for the sort of last of the first set of discussions, and that is just to make sure that we have recognized and we are well aware that there is this impact of the climate change, and that is not region specific. It's affecting everybody, everywhere. And like most things in life, it affects the poorer sections of the population harder. That's the reality of life. Roberto, let me come to you. You obviously have a global role. You look at the world in many, many ways. PepsiCo is this giant company. You run their foundation. What's your take on this, both as a company, but as an ambassador for change in terms of what needs to happen?
Well, I think I would start with the last thing you said, which is I think we all agree that climate change and it is affecting everybody. It's affecting everybody in the world, but some more than others. I think that's where we start with. Developing countries, vulnerable communities, those are the ones that are most affected. And honestly, if we look at those communities, the most vulnerable ones in the developing countries, they are mostly in the food supply chains. They are at the rural areas, and they are extremely affected by these changes. There are more droughts, there are floods. It's either droughts or floods, but whatever happens, these communities are severely affected, and we need to make things that have an impact. And there is no government out there, no company out there, no civil society organization out there that alone can do the trick. The only way that we do this is if we do it together. And I think that's where the private sector comes into play. 25% of global emissions who are affecting climate change, who are provoking all these disasters, come from land use. Land use. And we can make a change. And frankly, agriculture today, the land use is part of the problem. Like I said, 25% of the emissions come from there, but it's also the highest potential of sequestration of carbon. If we transition from the traditional methods of agriculture and move towards climate positive agriculture or regenerative agriculture, whatever label you give it, using the proper cover crops, avoiding tillage, reducing water drainage, water irrigation, reducing electricity. All these things together make a huge impact on the livelihood of the producer and in the community itself. So there are answers out there. They're technically possible. They're actually not very difficult. But what we do need is the political determination to do it. We need the right incentives. You mentioned that financing is being discussed everywhere. I hope that this discussion is going somewhere, because we need to transition from the traditional methods of agriculture to the new, more technologically savvy and climate-friendly ways of doing that. And we need to finance this transition.
So, thank you, Robert. I'm happy you said what you said, because it's not all gloom and doom, right? It's not too late. There are solutions. There is technology, and there is a need for a different appreciation of nature and behave accordingly. That's pretty much what you're saying. I want to come to you, Masida. Can you hear me? Just to kind of create a bit of controversy, if I may. Now, one hears reports that in Indonesia, even today, there is a lot of indiscriminate felling of trees, clearing of forests, to clear it up for fishing or what have you. Is that happening? And if it's happening, what is the government being able to do to stop it? And more importantly, not just stop it, but to give people an alternative livelihood. Because it's always about that, isn't it? Over to you.
Yeah, I think the challenge really is how we align our objective with the community in the forest area, for example. What we are currently doing is that we have a project in the forest area or near the shoreline with the community level institution that, they can take care of the forest, but they can also monetize it through carbon market. So we have some projects in the reforestation of the Indonesian forest using incentive through the carbon market. And then the community close to the forest, they can also get the benefit from the new production or new reforestation from the new projects. The second one is that we're creating like another project near the shoreline. So because of the climate change, the shoreline changed, right? So when you fish, usually you fish close to the island, but now you have to go far into the ocean, right? Now, the challenge with the small fishers is that we don't have a cold storage ready in the shoreline.
Okay.
So one of the adaptation programs that we're currently working on with the GCF is actually creating the availability of affordable cold storage for small fishermen, small units fishermen, usually it's a household level or just a small unit. So that even though because of the climate, they need to adapt by going to fish through the middle of the forest, they can afford to have the cold storage. So this little activity is actually, I think, what we're currently focusing on to lessen the impact of this climate and also yeah.
Thank you very much, Rashida. So I want to come to you, Jibril. I'll tell you why. Because what you said just now, Rashida, is extremely instructive. That you have recognized the problem, you have a government that is doing something about it, and there is a method to all of this. Now, what I'm coming to you, Jibril, is in many ways, Sudan used to be, and probably still is, the granary of the continent, and still should be. But it has gone through some recent challenges, be it political, be it economical, and be it certainly environmental. Do you have the willpower, number one, the intent, and the ability to do something about this? Or are you relying on external support to manage the excesses of the problems you're facing from climate change?
Well, Sudan is not a Robinson Crusoe island, so I can't say we are going to do everything on our own, and I can't claim to have the resources to do whatever we wanted to do. But for sure, we have the will, we have the intent to tackle the problems we are facing. With the help of definitely of some sort of finance, we can do a lot. So actually, the will is not enough. You need, in addition to the will, a high degree of awareness of the effects of climate change among the population themselves, and also a high degree of awareness again about how or the capacity to look for resources to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So we need to build the capacity of the people so that they can work on this, as well as we need resources to build, for example, green belts, to construct proper canals so that we will not be faced with floods and so on. So actually, we need that.
Thank you. So that allows me to come to Dr. Hamidi. Hamidi, you did say that money is never enough, but we also agree money helps, right? And given what you're hearing from a neighboring country, part of your region, what is the greater role that you think the Arab Monetary Union needs to play to be able to help the region in terms of identifying climate issues and how it's affecting communities, identifying it one, and then helping them to not mitigate it, but manage the livelihood challenges that has arisen out of it? What's the role you see? Do you see your role, or do you think that that's not a problem for you?
Well, any challenges in the region is a challenge for us as an institution, not only for the Arab Monetary Fund, but for the other Arab financial institutions who are contributing a great deal of money resources and human resources toward this challenge. Today we have announced with the Arab Coordination Group that there is a commitment of $24 billion for those issues of sustainability and climate change. And therefore, I believe that we should start with and focus on the implementation. Not what we have, not what is not enough, etc. So let us move, and this gathering of COP27 is focusing on the implementation, and therefore there is a great deal of opportunity for the whole world now to move together in order to face those issues of challenges. And again, I believe that we should not leave any country behind, because any country behind is an issue.
Okay. So, Ravi, you have confirmed that this is a collective responsibility, there is need for solidarity, and there is certainly need for regional love.
There is a need for world solidarity, and there is a need for regional
Collaboration and support.
working together from financial institutions and from able countries and from rich countries and from the developed world to developing countries. Let us not forget that
Okay,
Africa did not contribute a great deal to climate change. It is also the developed countries who did contribute, and they should put their share on the table.
Fantastic. That allows me so nicely to move to you, sir. Doctor. You say that there is an element of responsibility, and therefore there has to be contribution from the countries that created the problem in the first place. We are going into that role-playing game, but that's okay, it's always nice. But Dr. Mushinga, let me come to you. Africa, particularly Sub-Saharan Africa, has similar challenges, right? Economic challenge. Today we have dollar liquidity or liquidity generally as a challenge. We have cost of money as a challenge. And we have a ecology and an environment which is almost on a daily basis shifting to the detriment of the livelihood of the people. Where is help going to come from for Africa? Who is going to fund the support that you need?
When you look at the global figures, one realizes that we may not get the money. As we industrialize, the figures that is coming out, I think you also undertook the study, is that between now and 2050, Africa will need about $2 trillion to decarbonize. The question is where that money is going to come. It's very, very, very difficult. And there are heaps and heaps of amounts of that are expected. Electricity, a lot of dollars are needed to ensure that 100% of Africans have access to electricity. 970 million Africans don't have access to safe water, that's money. So the focus now should be on domestic resource mobilization. We are coming up with a very, very aggressive program of domestic resource mobilization. Anchored, we are coming up with a very, very ambitious program of domestic resource mobilization, anchored on improving tax administration and eliminating illicit financial flows. Illicit financial flows, that's about $97 billion annually. If we can curtail the illicit financial flows, we'll be able to improve the domestic resource mobilization. But what is tearing us in the face is that aid as we knew it is more or less coming to an end. Africa has to learn to move out of aid dependence.
Thank you. Dr. Mujahid, what you essentially said is that if deliverance is not going to come from outside, it has to come from within, correct? And self-reliance is the way to go. I like that, I hear that, but I also know the amount you quoted, a couple of $1 trillion. So as much as you have the will, the intent, and certainly the desire to make things happen, I think there is a capacity issue. Allows me to come to you, Robert. In your foundation hat, and also the hat generally that I'm sure you wear, in terms of the point that Dr. Abidi made about the responsibility aspect of the nations that lit the fire. What do you think we can do to help the more vulnerable developing parts of the world? How do we do it?
First of all, you have to have the right diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to spend the money on? What are you going to apply your resources to? Where are you going to make the investments? We are convinced, as a food and beverage company, that is that you have a hard time convincing the farmer to move in that direction, because there are investments to be made. Overall, in 3 or 4 years' time, they will see the difference. They will be spending less on fertilizers, they will be spending less on water, less on energy, they will be making more money. But at the end of the day, they need to make those investments. And that's where the institutions that we have here in this panel can help. Not only them, governments can help too. Governments can introduce the right policies. Billions are spent on subsidies all over the world today. Let's spend it wisely. Let's spend it on the things that make a difference. Help farmers move in that direction.
Now, I'm going to stop here because I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. You are saying, I'm going to put you on a spot. You are saying that there is ways of making sure this doesn't happen again in terms of methods used, responsibilities applied, etc. But what about the damage already done? Where is the funding going to come to make Africa's infrastructure resilient? Because it currently isn't. Never mind what's going to happen in the future. Where is the funding going to come for addressing the livelihood failures, if that's the right way to put it, of existing rural communities? Where is it going to come from?
It's not going to come from one place only.
Okay, tell us where it's going to come from.
Yeah, it's going to come from everyone. It's going to come from companies.
Who is everyone?
We're investing. It's going to come from regional development banks. It's going to come from developed countries who have over time developed technologies, who can incentivize green and circular economy, who can provide the aid that is necessary to educate the farmers to move the needle on the ground.
Is it going to come? Are there pledges from the developed countries?
Oh, I'm 100% convinced that it will. But we need to know where the money is going to.
Okay.
Right? So are we investing in the right technologies? Are we investing in the right productive methods? I think that's where I think the collective diagnosis has to be there.
So that's a good point. That the diagnosis has to be there so that the efforts can be pointed and therefore effective. That's what you said. That kind of brings me to the last round because we've got 10 minutes to go. Rashida, I want to come to you. A lot of the work that Indonesia is doing, is it looking at the region when it looks at climate mitigation and climate resiliency and addressing the vulnerability factors? Or are you looking at it very, very inwardly and domestically? Number one question. And secondly, what has been the role of the international community in funding some of these programs that you referred to?
So the way we're working on the climate agenda is that it's actually trying to solve our own climate issues as well, but at the same time we're looking at the region as a whole. So for example, we're working on an energy transition mechanism right now. We have a challenge in our energy. We don't have an undersupply of energy. In fact, we have an oversupply of almost 40% in the main island. It means that if we want to change to renewable, the energy mix, then we have to phase out some of the brown energy first. That is investment. That is not recognizable as the green investment. And then we need financing to finance the renewable energy. So what I'm saying is that it's not only about, advanced economy are promising money like 100 billion, is that double counting, how do we monitor it, how do we deliver it, it's unclear until today. The issue is that how you create an ecosystem of policy, right? You have regulation intact, you have institution, you have the incentives aligned between the population. For example, like I'm telling you the deforestation and the coastline story, and then also later in the energy transition mechanism, people who will be affected, the worker in that plant, for example. So there's a lot of stakeholder even within the internal government. On top of that, you still have subsidy for energy, for example, and you kind of want to cushion the population from the increasing inflation so that during the pandemic recovery, the monetary side doesn't have to put the brake too fast if you have like a really high inflation rate. So in Indonesia, we're trying to balance all of that objective domestically, but also your second question on the role of international. On the energy transition mechanism, we got a consortium of financing to finance up to 4.8 billion of our transition in the format of blended financing between concessional fund and also private fund. But also there's private sectors coming into our sovereign wealth fund in the transition. So it's a matter of how you create the project that is bankable. So you need to put some de-risking instrument and mechanism in there from the fiscal or concessional fund. Once it's bankable, then it's easier for us to be able to crowd in private investment. So otherwise, we will just point fingers, oh, advanced economy, have you pledged, or emerging economy, have you prepared the projects, and it's a never-ending cycle.
I love that. I love it. That it's not about blame, it's about diagnosing, as you said, it's then finding projects that is structured in a blended way so that there is ultimately a commercial return attached to it. And that's how it's going to be, excuse the pun, sustainable, right? Because otherwise we'll just go around in circles. Thank you for that insight. Dr. Jibril, one question to you, sir. If you do not address the vulnerabilities that is affecting the communities, do you expect a huge political backlash?
Sure, not only for Sudan actually, it will spill over to neighboring countries as well. You know, as I said, for example, desertification leads and floods as well leads to displacement. This displacement is not only internal displacement, but it leads to external migration. It leads to human trafficking. For example, from the droughts in Somalia and the Horn of Africa. People have to look for a better life in Europe, then they have to find a way to go all the way through Sudan. So unless you tackle these small problems, they become much, much complicated.
So what you're saying is that if we don't tackle it, unfortunately it looks like we are tackling it, not enough maybe, but there are mechanisms, there are case studies, and there are protocols around which it is being tackled. That's a good thing. The bad thing is, if it's not tackled, we are going to see some very serious unintended consequences. Brings me to you, Dr. Anthony. In your region, given like other developing countries, huge number of young people, livelihoods, etc. affected, what is the political agenda that is backing the climate agenda to make sure that these people are protected and given alternative ways of living? What's happening there?
Thank you very much. I think this is an important question of vulnerable communities and young people. The young people in our region constitutes about 60% or 65% of the population. And therefore it's where we are addressing the climate change. It's extremely critical also when for finance, the accessibility to finance. I mean, sometimes the finance is there, but it's not accessible for vulnerable communities or for young individuals. And therefore we at the Arab Monetary Fund very much involved in financial inclusion issues of relevance also to climate change. And that with the financial inclusion, the youth will not be left behind, they will be there. I think also in every challenge there is an opportunity for the private sector. I think we have to create this opportunity for the private sector. For example, insurance products upgrade is extremely important to be there.
Blended ones. Yeah.
That will create an incentive for the private sector to be involved. That will create an incentive for small farmers and for the youth also not to be excluded. And that will reduce the pressure on the public finance. And therefore, public finance will be will go to sectors like education and health. We as a financial institution is very much involved.
Yeah.
We have done several things. One of issuing guidelines. We are very much involved in training and capacity building for the technical people. And we are very involved in dialogue like this one with Ministers of Finance, and the Minister has participated, and the central bank governors.
Great point. Don't crowd the public sector. Find a way for the private sector capital to come. Create commercial viability. Use blended finance, and you have the solution. Correct? Dr. Muchumda, you got 2 minutes, and then I'll come to Roberto and conclude. In African countries, are you seeing the domestic financial sector, the African multilaterals working constructively towards dealing with this problem?
Well, yeah.
And you can criticize me, I'm part of that system.
I know.
Africa Finance
We have a
Corporation.
memorandum of understanding with the African Finance Corporation. Whenever we have got emergencies, we have mobilized Pan-African financial institutions, the African Development Bank, the African Export-Import Bank, the African Trade Insurance Agency, the African Finance Corporation, among others, and they have responded very well. Now, one of the issues that is going to face us, and the Africa wants to really contribute, is to really reduce environmental costs by way of transporting commodities. So we are going to promote localized production, starting with the minerals. The director responsible for mineral development is here. We have what we call a strategic and green minerals. Our plan is that we should do value addition at source, so that we contribute to climate mitigation. And we hope that that can be broadened, and we need a very good stakeholder base. So the African financial institutions are very active. Of course, sometimes there are issues of risk, and that's one of the issues that we are going to have next year. We're going to mobilize all the African financial institutions, including the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, and the mutual funds, to really come together so that we really say what are the perceptions about risk in Africa. Are they real or they are not real? So that we improve the investment climate across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mujanga. The vote of confidence has been given. You are saying the African institutions are working with you, private sector capital is looking at it, and producing and manufacturing at source is a great way of reducing impact on the climate sector. Thank you for that. Roberto, you have the last laugh, the last word, whatever you want to call it.
Well,
please give us hope. Give us hope.
Yeah, let me finish with this. We cannot wait any longer. We talked about diagnosis, we talked about blended financing, we talked about government policies, we cannot wait for all that to align before we begin to do things. It has to be done now. So companies like PepsiCo, I'm traveling within the US and outside in the world, everywhere I go, I go to farms, I talk to farmers. We try to identify what's happening on the ground, because whatever the solution is, it's not going to be one recipe fits all. What works in Sudan is not going to work in Indonesia, or it's not going to work in Brazil. It's going to be different. It's going to be very local. And we all have the duty to begin to understand what needs to be done and act immediately. Because when governments, when financial institutions, they see the solutions, when they see that it's working on the ground, I have zero doubts that they're going to be engaged and they will begin to enable with the policies and mobilize the financing that is necessary. But we need to do it now.
Thank you. We can't wait for the perfect solution. We can't wait for over-engineering the solutions. We got to start now. That's the message. Thank you very much. And guys, the other message Roberto didn't give you is drink Pepsi. It's good for you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev Gupta. Thank you very much to all the panelists. It was great having you with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we approach